Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Executive Chairman of Aris Management and Principal Owner of the Atlanta Hawks, Tony Ressler. AltFinance CEO Marcus Shaw, Morehouse College President Dr. David Thomas, and from Bloomberg News, Ms. Jordyn Holman.
All right.
Hello, everyone. So we are going to be talking about AltFinance. You heard who's on this awesome panel today. And so I think just as, table setter, we all could probably agree that finance needs to do more in terms of recruiting Black diversity. We've seen progress in the past few years, but we need more consistent, rapid growth. So that's what this panel's about. Marcus, I'm going to start with you.
Fantastic.
You're at AltFinance.
Indeed.
So tell me why, with your organization that's focusing on getting more Black talent, but specifically HBCU students into alternative finance, why do you want to focus in that sector of finance compared to investment banks, say?
So, Jordyn, thanks for the question. The world of finance has been dealing with the diversity and really the inclusion aspect of talent for quite some time. Investment banks have thought about how do they do this and working with great organizations like MLT and SEO for a number of years. But what we've seen is that the alternative investment space is generally smaller, but has a lot of influence. I mean, you're talking companies that may have a few thousand employees, but certainly have relationships with companies, hundreds and thousands of companies that have millions of employees. And so finding a pathway for young Black talent, not only to find their way into the industry, but also to grow their level of inclusiveness in the industry is something that we found was really important. And so we wanted to focus on this part of the industry in finance.
And then, so Dr. Thomas, you run Morehouse, which is obviously a very storied institution and full of Black talent. So why do you think that HBCU students might often get overlooked when it comes to being recruited into alternative finance?
I think there's two sides to it. One is, alternative finance, asset management. It's really a relatively small workforce in that industry. And it's an industry where up until now, people get recruited off of networks of people who are already there. And it's an industry where you don't have many, for example, graduates of Morehouse, unlike some other industries where you have a lot. So where people recruit off of networks, who the people in your organization already know is who they're going to bring in. I think there's another side of it, which is, at least when I think about Morehouse and our focus for the last 150 years on being an institution that produces individuals who go out into the world and not only do well for themselves, but well for their community and the Black community. We've created lots of doctors, lots of public servants, lots of lawyers, right? Because those, for many years, were the fields that we saw and preachers, not to mention, those were the fields that we saw directly impacting what happened to Black people on a day-to-day basis. And now for us, what this effort represents in terms of having our students understand the broader world of finance, alternative finance in particular, is about the last leg of the civil rights movement, which is economic prosperity, intergenerational wealth, and value creation. And so there's kind of two sides to the coin, right? It's a window from which that industry didn't see us. It's also a door upon which we weren't knocking hard in the way that we were knocking on those other doors. And now I think there's a convergence. But for me, and sometimes, I get asked at the college, why do you have this big focus on entrepreneurship, this alternative finance effort? And for me, it's the last leg of the civil rights movement that Dr. King, our most famous alumni, represented. And it's about intergenerational wealth creation. And that has long-term impact for an institution like Morehouse.
And I think it's interesting because often when we think about finance, we're thinking about the big banks, we're thinking about the household names. So Tony, can you explain, like in your perspective, why it's important to start recruiting for alternative finance now, private equity, getting folks in the door in this sector of finance?
Sure. So to many folks, alt-finance is actually a term that's not easily understood. But in its simplest form, the financial sector of the United States is extraordinarily large. That most people know. And large banks are lending to often big companies, to governments, even to individuals, whether it's car loans or home loans, et cetera. The alt-finance industry is basically a direct lender, a private equity investor, a real estate buyer, and actually just using Ares Management, of which I help to grow. We have, as Dr. Thomas just mentioned, we have maybe 2,000 employees. We touch, we lend, we invest in over 1,500 companies. So we have, shall we say, a bit more reach than just our employee base.
Right.
And again, to talk to entrepreneurship, to talk to, if you will, economic empowerment for many communities, particularly the African American community, access to mentorship and to capital is precisely what changes communities, what changes opportunities. And again, we've said this over and over, if you're here to kind of make a statement versus make an impact, if you want to make an impact, you have to figure out how to rejigger the playing field to a degree. And to me, at least, waiting for the public sector to do things, you could wait a very long time. And the private sector has an ability with university leaders, with college leaders, with the world of academia, with folks like Marcus that are willing to take on this type of function where you could get several firms to commit themselves to create more inclusion, more diversity in their industry over a period of time, with dollars, with mentorship, with training, with curriculum. That to me is what I think, as Dr. Thomas again said, this is what this world requires today. It's both good business and the right thing to do. And I think we're seeing it, and hopefully the alt-finance industry is leading by example, at least. That's the hope. That's the expectation. A lot of pressure on Marcus to make sure that's the facts.
And we'll stand up to that.
And over the past few years, we have seen, like I said, progress. We've seen commitments. For example, Goldman Sachs, they have a commitment to hire and recruit for more HBCUs. Bank of America has committed, I think, $10 million towards this effort as well. But this isn't the first time that corporations have stated their intentions to recruit. So this is a question for any of you. Like, what makes you optimistic that the goals that you all have now when it comes to getting more Black talent within alternative finance firms will work out better than we've seen in the past?
Well, again, I'll defer to Marcus and Dr. Thomas on this, but please understand, we said if we can get 3 meaningful firms, all with significant reach, Apollo Management, Oaktree, Ares Management, if we could get 3 firms to commit $90 million to make sure over the next 10 years we could go to high-quality colleges with African American students that want to be in our industry, and we could help, with assistance in a partnership, help train and mentor, provide scholarships, but be assured that we are committed to hire over the next 10 years in real numbers, that could impact an industry. And we think that's how you lead by example. Maybe Marcus or David, you guys could talk more specifically, but this is doing something with a plan that we're committed to over an extended period of time that should in fact transform our industry.
And for this, before I let Marcus hop in, are there like certain metrics that you all are looking at as this program takes off to make sure that there are steps?
I think there are.
Yeah, so there are certainly metrics that we're looking at, but we also are doing something that has never been done before. The alternative investment industry, by and large, used investment banking as a pipeline for recruiting talent. The networks that Dr. Thomas talked about is something that was not made available to many of the students. High quality talent, high performing talent that's coming out of historically black colleges and universities. What we're doing is saying we're starting with our initial fellowship class this year. We're going to have 20 to 25 students in that platform. We'll re-up that and grow that over a 10-year period until we make a dent. And again, you're not looking at thousands or tens of thousands, but if we have hundreds of people that are at these companies over that period of time, then we would have significantly transformed the wealth gap for people that are working in that industry, but more importantly, created a multiplier effect for people that are at companies that are being invested in, for people that are in deal flow, for people that look up to people, right, and can build familiarity with people that are in that industry. So there's a significant multiplier effect. I think to your earlier point, Jordyn, around why this industry in this point in time, coaching and mentoring, building networks, and letting people know what the playbook for success is in this industry. This is a high-performing industry that requires high performance in training, and so our ability to give that to students is something that we're incredibly proud of.
Yeah, it's a good question. What makes me more optimistic? And truth in advertising, 2 weeks ago I turned 65. Right?
Happy belated.
Thank you.
You're a lot older than I am.
And so I have grown up in the period where, we had the civil rights movement, we had affirmative action, we had diversity now. And I see the ways in which the last 2 years have revealed how far we've come and how far we haven't come. And what makes me optimistic right now is I've seen a different level of engagement and conversation among leaders of the industries and organizations that can impact this. Also, I think institutions like Morehouse, and for that matter, Spelman and Clark, our companion schools in the Atlanta University Center, we're now also being selective about the partnerships we engage in. So that, because since George Floyd, lots of companies have knocked on my door, right? And for the companies that want to be in the old mode of what I call drive-bys, right? We want to flow in, maybe we collect some students, we're out, and we can put on, our broadcast or whatever that we're more. But we're partnering with institutions that share our values and also are willing to make long-term commitments and put in place the infrastructure to make sure that it doesn't die. And as Tony said, I'm a lot older than him by 3.5 years.
Marcus, you're next. We're going to you.
So he'll be around 3.5 years longer than I. But when Tony and I go our ways, there's actually an infrastructure that makes sure that 10-year proposition is delivered on, and that those institutions are also investing in our institutions such that if this initiative went away, we would have progress that wouldn't go away, even in the next 2 years. And at Morehouse, we see, in addition to the AltFinance initiative, we've had other companies and foundations come who want to invest in a very different way than at least I've seen. And the other great thing about initiatives like this one is it's not just about one company, right? It's about a domain and impacting a domain. So, it's not whether Aries gets, 5 interns, but it's really about what happens in the industry. And so we're looking at really changing domains as opposed to changing companies. And I think that makes a huge difference from where we were, in the different eras of at least my work over the last 40 years that's been at this intersection of race and corporate America.
So the intentionality you're
So
seeing
the intentionality and the nature of the intentionality and connecting it to how we do business.
Right.
Right?
And this might be a question for Marcus. I know that with AltFinance, you guys are focusing on a few campuses right now, Morehouse being one, Spelman, Clark, Atlanta. Do you have plans to expand to other HBCU campuses? And if so, which ones?
Absolutely. So we started off with the 4 partners because of the work that Dr. Thomas and Tony talked about, that there are people that were dedicated to helping partner with us to make this a success early on. But we're also partnering with Jordyn to create a broader platform that will be available to all historically Black colleges and universities. And it's really about giving students access to some of the skills and knowledge that will help them augment their way in kind of what I call the 21st century financial literacy, right? Years ago, 30, 40 years ago, it's about balancing a checkbook. Mm-hmm. Today, every student that will go through this program will have an understanding of reading a P&L, understanding how to translate that back to their own personal finance, understanding what a term sheet looks like, right? Some of the more advanced topics, the things that are important for alternative finance or alternative investments. So I think that certainly we want to have an influence across all historically Black colleges and universities, but we'll continue to work with partners to deploy what I would say a more high-touch model. And the universities like Morehouse, Spelman, Howard, and Clark have been a great partner in starting that.
Because it's curious, because HBCUs, there's about 100, a little over 100 of them in the US. So what impact do you think that could have to make sure that you have resources for folks who aren't at those 3 campuses?
So I think the number one, and of the 4 campuses.
Thank you for helping me count.
The number one most important thing for AltFinance is to make sure that there's no student that if they have a desire to go into the alternative investment industry, does not know where to start, does not know where to build those relationships, does not have an awareness of the firms or how those businesses make money. We've been there, and it's a very difficult proposition to overcome if you don't know what that looks like. So now, the brightest students at these schools will have the opportunity to walk into an interview with one of these companies, should they choose, and say, you know what, I understand how this company makes money, I have an understanding of private credit, private debt, real estate, all of the facets of alternative finance, and that's step 1. From there, these are high-performing students. They will succeed, but building those networks and exposure is step number 1.
Got it. And Tony, you mentioned earlier about this accountability factor when it comes to firms within the private sector. Can you speak a little bit more about what makes you hopeful that private sector holding itself accountable when it comes to recruiting Black talent is the way to go?
Well, again, it's not just recruiting Black talent, in my opinion, but it's actually positioning these young men and women to succeed. And many of these young folks have a much tougher situation than I did when I started. Because when I started, there were a whole lot of folks, senior folks, that were mentors at the firm I started at, that looked like me, that were helping me, that I knew or knew of somehow. Many of these young people don't have that benefit. That's a disadvantage. So our job is to even the playing field. And I would argue that the curriculum that Marcus just described, the young men and women that are coming from these quality institutions, they are hitting the ground running. And yes, it's the private sector, it's firms like ours, who have to go out of their way to make sure we even the playing field. And historically, for a whole bunch of reasons, some obvious, some not so obvious, but historically people weren't trying to truly level the playing field, create mentorship, to permit people coming into this industry, hitting the ground running, that haven't had a history in this industry and didn't have mentorship, frankly, of folks that looked like them and were looking and trying to help them along in their career. So I would argue that many parts of what we're trying to do is, I would argue, I would hope, trying to be, if you will, a research laboratory not just for the alt finance industry, but for the entire financial sector, really for every industry in America. Come up with a method by which you could create a more inclusive business or industry, and even the playing field. And I do think our model, we were laughing about this before, is it the perfect model? We're going to find out over the next 10 years. But we think it's financed. We think we have high quality partners. We have superb institutions that are partnering with us. Again, we've started the process. We know young men and women of color want to be in our industry and frankly just want to be treated fairly. And that's what I think this structure will help create. We'll find out.
You know, it's great as an academic to be on the stage with a finance guy who talks about, you know, hypotheses and research questions. You know, I love it. But what I think is also powerful about this approach that's different from what I've seen in the past is by putting HBCUs like Morehouse and Spelman and Clark and others at the center of it, we're starting with places that are pure, what I call pure channels for black talent. Right? So I was dean at Georgetown for 6 years, great institution, but you can't go to Georgetown and find 2,000 black men in one place who might be, right, the talent that you're searching for. You might go and find one or two. By coming to institutions like ours, you increase the likelihood of finding that talent. And also what happens in those firms at a scale that might not happen if all you were doing was going to places where you find onesies and twosies. And where you create scale, you open it up for people in those other institutions. 'Cause part of what influences decisions like who you bring into an industry is who you see there. And if in 5 years we've actually changed who's there, people will also see the students who are not at, you know, Morehouse or Spelman, all right? And they will also find their way there. My students who are at Georgetown will hear from their colleagues who are at Morehouse, hey, have you thought about alternate finance? And it's influencing that network. And what I've seen in the past, it was institutions would say, well, where did we go to school? Right? And well, we went to Georgetown, we went to Harvard, we went to Yale, let's go there and find them. And they wouldn't think, where are they in large numbers? Where's the pure channel? And for me, Morehouse and Spelman and Clark, we are pure channels of black talent. You want to find it? It's you know, it's kind of like Nickelodeon, right? If you had little kids, you didn't wake up and say, let's watch a little CBS, but you would sit your kids in front of Nickelodeon because you know what's going to come out of the channel. Same thing when you come to Morehouse. You know when you turn on that spigot what's going to come out, and you increase the likelihood of finding that talent, and that then influences what happens at other institutions that are predominantly white.
It
the
is so true.
opportunities they see.
I mean, what Dr. Thomas, for 30 years, I actually ran a financial institution in AltFinance.
Yes.
The people that led recruiting, you would say to them,
Where do you go to school?
go figure it out. And what would they do? They would go to the colleges they attended and recruit. Generally people that look like them. And the truth of the matter is you have to recreate that playing field where you don't create the flexibility of just let everyone who heads recruiting go where they think best, where they feel most comfortable, but you got to widen the fairway. And I would say AltFinance, what we're trying to create in our industry is widening that fairway. I don't think we're the only industry that needs to be doing it, but I assure you we're one of them.
And we have to wrap up, but quick. As you said, this could be a structure for other industries. So with that in mind, what's one actionable step that if someone's trying to diversify their industry through recruitment and making sure that they retain talent, what would they do first?
Well, I'm going to argue that they should probably call Marcus or David to make sure they understand what AltFinance is as a model. But there are so many companies trying to, Goldman Sachs deserves credit. I don't know if it's so popular. They said they will not take a company public unless there are 2 people of color on the board before they would take a company public. That's something the private sector has led, and something that does immediately force people to change the way they look at that. So all I'm saying is take good ideas that are helping move the ball and share them.
Dr. Thomas?
I would say 1, make a long-term commitment that you put a stake in the ground in, and 2, look for institutions that have already proven that they can produce the talent that you're looking for and partner with them and scale what they are already doing. The great thing about where we are today is that we have all the models we need. The question is investing in them so they can scale.
Yeah, I agree.
Marcus?
So I'll have 2 as well. Number 1, be intentional from the top. We did not get here through being unintentional, and we will not get from here by being unintentional. So be intentional. Number 2, close the gap early, right? We see this in sports. We all have young kids that go to trainers, and we send them to a trainer to play basketball or football or whatever, and we close that gap early. We've got to do the same around talent. And so when companies see young talent that have all the raw skills to be good, work with organizations like AltFinance to help provide the mentorship, the curriculum, and the pathway to be successful in closing that gap.
Awesome. Well, all 3 of you, thank
Jordyn,
you so much.
Thank you for this.
Thank
I
you.
want to thank everyone.
Yeah.
It's actually the first meeting I've been to in 3 or 4 years where no one's asked me a basketball question.
We still have time. No, I'm kidding.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good to see you.